whoa, hallelujah, which normally we would pronounce hallelujah, but because it has God's name in it, some people are extra careful and he changed it to hallelujah. That is calling neshama to hallelujah. Every soul that breathes, praise God, from Psalm 150, sung by the insurmountable, the unmistakable Mordechai ben David, MBD. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. We've got a couple of really fun teachings tonight, including we're going to ask a question that we've kind of been skirting around, but it's a great question. Can we make kiddush over beer? Believe it or not, it's not a yes or no answer. And we're going to encounter this amazing teaching, which wasn't really on the page. It was suggested by the page, and I'm glad that I listened to Shmuley Bornstein teach this daf this morning. And he made this beautiful point about whom we call the older and the younger when we're talking about siblings, right? When we're talking about siblings, who do we actually refer to as the older and the younger? The answer is not obvious, and it leads to the title of today's show, Why Do We Honor the Last Born? Let's get it going. Who's with us tonight as we do a little learning on a great Monday night? Yehudit in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, James in Indy, Renee in Indy, Melissa in Great Neck, Tom says Shavua Tov, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in Chicago, Patrice in Utah, Bill in Berkeley, Carol in Cleveland, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Alan tags Darian, Kelsa in Pasadena, Renee loves that line, Colin Neshama to Hallelujah, Chaim Burke in Charlotte, got away from me. Where did he go? Where's Chaim? Where's Chaim? Pauline in Arkansas. Steve Ribick says, Shalom. Ann in Merced. Keeps jumping on me. Nancy in Cape Cod. And Nancy in Southern Pines. Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. Wow, people are just jumping in now, and the thing keeps jumping up on me, and then I can't see who I was going to read next. Hold on a second. Where was I? Paula is here. Brinna saying Erev Tov. Alan in New York. Haya in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Haya. Great to have you with us, literally on the other side of the world. Raúl dice Shalom desde El Salvador. Bienvenido. John in Sedona. Bill says tonight's question sounds fascinating. I'm already wondering about other alcoholic beverages from other parts of the world as a result. Who's over there on the YouTube side? Linda says, so happy to catch him live tonight. Lynn in North Texas. Samantha says, shalom. And Lind Fam is Lisa in Washington who is friends with Rabbi Yonah. We love Rabbi Yonah Bookstein. Welcome, everybody. Great to be together. Where are we holding? This is Daf Kuf Zion, page 107, here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Passover. We're in the 10th chapter, still discussing the first Mishnah of chapter 10, which we read on page 99. So here, 8 pages later, we're still discussing that same short Mishnah. But tonight, we actually return to one of the teachings in the Mishnah after our long digression. The last few days, we've been talking about Havdala and kiddush. Kiddush, the blessing we say over wine, usually, as we enter Shabbos or a holiday. Havdala, which we say over wine, usually, when we bless God for distinguishing between the sacredness of Shabbos or the festival and the secular of the regular days of the week, the regular weekdays. And we've been learning a lot of laws from Kiddush and Havdala that have application in other areas, and we've been learning the details and nuances of Havdala and Kiddush. That's going to continue, and we're going to get some beautiful new nuances about that, including, can we say Kiddush over beer? Why or why not? Let's begin right at the top of page 107 on the A side. Rava said, the law is, that one who tasted food before Kiddush may recite Kiddush, right? We saw that you're not supposed to eat food on Friday night after Shabbos begins before you've said the blessing, blessing God for sanctifying, right? For making Shabbos holy, for resting on the after 6 days and declaring the seventh day holy and commanding us to rest on the seventh day. And now we in turn bless God and sanctify the day. Until we do that on Friday night, we shouldn't eat from nightfall until we say kiddush. And one who tasted food before Havdala, one who tasted food before kiddush may recite kiddush, right? So you shouldn't eat food before kiddush, but if you did eat food, you may still recite kiddush. And that's what we learned yesterday, and the sages said, okay, so you ate some garlic, you're going to have bad breath. Should we say to him, eat more garlic so you're going to have even worse breath? Are we going to say to somebody that transgressed by eating before kiddush that now he can't do kiddush and he's going to get even deeper and further away from fulfilling his obligations? So you shouldn't eat before kiddush, but if you did eat before kiddush, you're still permitted to say kiddush. And one who tasted food before Havdala may recite Havdala. At the end of Shabbos, after Shabbos ends, you should not eat Saturday night before you recite the Havdala blessing. But if you did eat, you may still recite the Havdala blessing. And one who did not recite kiddush on Shabbos night, Friday night, may recite kiddush anytime the entire day until the conclusion of Shabbos. If you don't say the Friday night kiddush, which is different than the Saturday morning kiddush, but you forgot to say it or were unable to say it on Friday night, so you may still say the Friday night kiddush all during the day on Saturday, although we don't include the language of there was evening and there was morning the sixth day, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all their hosts, because that already happened. Okay, where am I? So he may recite kiddush anytime during the day until the conclusion of Shabbos. And likewise, one who did not recite Havdala at the conclusion of Shabbos on Saturday night may recite Havdala anytime during the entire week. And as we learned, not the entire week, but if you miss saying Havdala on Saturday night when you were supposed to, you can still say it until Tuesday afternoon. Amemar, the sage Amemar, began this teaching of Rava in this emended formulation. So he is going to now repeat just what Rava just said, this ruling of Rava, but a little slightly different. Let's see if we can tell what's different. Amemar taught this teaching of Rava in a slightly shorter form. Said Amemar, Rava said, the halacha, the law is that one who tasted may recite kiddush, right? One who tasted before kiddush may recite kiddush. That one who tasted may recite Havdala, meaning one who tasted before Havdala, he may recite Havdala. And one who did not recite kiddush on Shabbos night may recite kiddush anytime during the day, meaning he can still recite it during the day on Shabbos. And one who did not recite Havdala at the conclusion of Shabbos may recite Havdala anytime the entire day, meaning he may recite Havdala on Sunday. So Amemar changes it a little bit. Rava said if you miss saying Havdala Saturday night, you could say it the whole week. We know that that means until Tuesday afternoon. When Amemar restates and kind of abbreviates Rava's teaching, he says, well, really, you should say it Sunday. Don't wait till Monday or Tuesday. The Gemara relates that Mar Yanuka, the younger Mar, and Mar Kashisha, the elder Mar, who were both sons of Rahista, said to Rav Ashi, the editor of the Talmud, so a late sage in Babylonia, a late Amora. The sages of the Talmud are known as Amoraim. So the Gemara relates that Mar Yanuka and Mar Kashisha, the sons of Rahista, said to Rav Ashi, once Amemar happened to come to our place, and we did not have wine for Havdalah. So we brought him beer, and he did not recite Havdalah, and he passed the night fasting, as it is prohibited to eat before Havdalah. The next day we exerted ourselves and brought him wine, and he recited Havdalah and tasted some food. The next year, Amemar came to visit again, and he came to our place, and once again we did not have wine, so we brought him beer. And he said, if it is difficult to obtain wine in your place, and beer is the wine of your province, Chamar Medina, the wine of the province, so then it's okay to say Havdalah over it. And he recited Havdalah over the beer and tasted some food. The Gemara notes that one may learn from this story of a Maimar visiting Rav Hista and his sons recounting what happened a few lessons. Now, before we get into the lessons about Havdala and whether we may say Havdala, the blessing over God separating between the sacred time of Shabbos and the secular time of the weekdays, we're going to learn a few lessons about making Havdala over beer. But before we go to that, we're going to take a stop for a moment and learn something about the sons of Rav Hista. So they were called Mar Yanuka and Mar Kashisha, literally the younger Mar and the older Mar. So they were known as the younger and the older. They were known to be the sons of Rav Hista, and they were called the younger master and the older master, right? So the Mar stands for a master here, meaning they are sages in their own right. Usually that title is reserved for the exilarch, okay? So I'm not sure if Mar Yanuk and Mar Kashisha rose to that level, but it was definitely a term of respect and authority. So imagine that Rav Hista raised his sons to be great sages in their own right, and one was known as the younger master and the older master. Here's the question: which one is older? You would think that the older master is obviously older than the younger master, right? It seems obvious. I listened to this daf being taught by Shmuley Bornstein today, and I'm glad I did. And he brought down, and I apologize, I don't remember the source that he quoted for it, but he had a source, is that when we say that Mar Yanuka was the younger master and that Mar Kashisha was the older master, so we actually understand that Mar Yanuka, right, who's known as the younger master, he's actually older. And the one who is known as the older master is actually younger. And why do we refer to them in this odd way? Because the one who was born when his father was younger, right, he is now older, but he was raised by the great Rav Hista in his youth. So Rav Hista, like any great sage, really grew all through his life. He grew in Torah knowledge, he grew in Torah wisdom, he grew in wisdom. And so like any parent ought, really, right, all human beings should keep learning and becoming bigger, more knowledgeable, wiser people, more capable of giving advice, growing into their role as an elder of the community. We should be able to look to our elders as sources of greater wisdom than the younger adults in the community. Therefore, one who has a child in his youth, okay, your first child is going to get the rights of the firstborn and the respect, the kavod, the honor of the firstborn. The firstborn is always owed honor, especially in these patriarchal ancient systems. The firstborn inherits more than the others and gets a little special honor at the table compared to all their siblings. However, we also learn that the youngest sibling, the lastborn, this one was raised by a parent who is at the oldest stage of the parent's development. And therefore, the parent is going to be transmitting greater wisdom. They have more wisdom to transmit to the lastborn than they had when they were raising the firstborn. It just stands to reason. It's logical. And so we learn out from that we have to give honor to the firstborn and we have to give honor to the lastborn. I'm a firstborn. I have a younger brother. All right. So he needs to respect me as the firstborn, and I need to respect him as the lastborn. And honestly, when I think about the differences between me and my brother, I think that he benefited from my parents being a little older, a little wiser, and it made him maybe he's a little calmer than me. Maybe he himself is a little bit of an older soul. He sees and listens in a way that I sometimes should. I give my brother a lot of credit. And so all of us, we should respect the firstborn because they generally have that attitude of gotta learn it on my own, just like the parents had to learn, by doing as they were raising kids. But we also got to give equal respect to the younger ones who learned a little bit more from mom and dad since they were older at the time that they were brought up. All right, that's the lesson of Mar Yanuka and Mar Kashisha, the younger master and the older master. Okay, now we go back to this incident when the great sage Amaymar came to the home of Rav Rahista, and so in the community where they lived, there wasn't a lot of wine. Wine was really difficult to come by. What they had was beer. In this case, what they mean is beer made from dates. They took date beer seriously. It was a good drink for them, and that's what they had available. Now, Amaymar, where he came from, the wine of the province, as it were, was wine, right? What's considered a fine drinking beverage where Amaymar came from is wine. So he expected that we would use the finest beverage when we're making blessings. Okay, we're saying goodbye to Shabbos during the Havdala ceremony. We do it over a cup of wine. So he's used to doing it over wine. They brought him beer. He's like, I'm not going to make Havdala over beer. Since he hasn't recited Havdala, and we've seen that it is preferable not to eat on Saturday night before you recite Havdala, and now he's not reciting Havdala. And yes, he could eat and still recite Havdala later, but ab initio, in the first place, that's not preferable. That's not the right way to do things. You shouldn't eat until you say Havdala. He doesn't. So Amaymar didn't want to say Havdala over beer, and he didn't want to eat without saying Havdala. And so the result was he afflicted himself. He didn't eat on Saturday night. Now, his hosts, right, so Rav Hista's sons are like, oh no, Amaymar's not eating. We got to take care of him. So they just went out and found somebody. They went down the street knocking on doors. Does anybody have wine? They found some wine. They brought it. He made Havdala, and then he ate, right? So that's the event. That's what happened. So the Gemara notes that one may learn from Amaymar's conduct 3 halachas, 3 laws. Learn from it that one who recites Havdala in the prayer service must recite Havdala again over a cup. As he obviously did evening services when Shabbos ended, they did the evening service of Saturday night, which is a weekday prayer. And on Saturday nights, we include the blessing of Havdala, blessing God for separating between sacred and secular, in the evening services, right? They do that with the minyan in the prayer, in the synagogue or in the study hall. Nevertheless, you have to make Havdala at home over a cup. And so we learn out from that story. And what else do we learn? And we learn from it that it is prohibited for a person to eat before he recites Havdala. Check. And learn from it that one who did not recite Havdala at the conclusion of Shabbos may recite Havdala anytime during the week. When they finally got him the wine, it was the next day, right? It was the next day. Was it the next day? He passed the night fasting. Amaymar didn't eat all night. They brought him some wine in the morning. Then he made Havdala, and then he ate. Okay. And as we learned yesterday, when you make Havdala on Sunday, you still make the blessing over the wine, but you don't make the blessing over the spice and the fire. That's only when you do Havdala in its time on Saturday night. Why? Because humankind was given fire after the first Shabbos, after Adam and Eve actually left the Garden of Eden. They ate the fruit and were told they would be expelled from the Garden of Eden on Friday afternoon. God let them spend Shabbos in the Garden of Eden. They went out Saturday night, but they were given fire to accompany them in this cold new world outside the Garden of Eden. In the above story, Amaymar refused to recite Havdala over beer. The Gemara addresses this issue at greater length. Rav Huna raised a dilemma before Rav Rahista. What is the halacha with regard to whether it is permitted to recite kiddush over date beer? He said, so Rav Rahista is answering. Now, this is Rav Rahista, who lives in the place where they only have beer, and Amaymar came and didn't want to make Havdala over beer. So Rav Rahista is giving the answer. He said, now, if with regard to barley beer, fig beer, and beer produced from berries, I raised a dilemma before Rav as to whether or not they may be used for kiddush, and Rav had previously raised this dilemma before Rabbi Achia, and Rabbi Achia had inquired of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and he did not resolve it for him, as he could not find a source that clearly permits it. Is it necessary to say that beer made from dates, which is inferior to those other types of beer, may not be used for kiddush? We've been talking about using beer for the blessing during Havdala, after Shabbos is over. Now the question is being asked, maybe we use beer for kiddush. And the answer is no. On Friday night, When we don't have wine, we do not say beer. We do not say kiddush. We don't sanctify the day over beer. What would you sanctify it over? We've discussed it before. Over the bread. You can make kiddush over the bread that you're going to have with your Friday night meal. Over the challah is what we normally use. That you could say kiddush over, but not over beer. And of course, the optimal is to say kiddush over wine. But if wine is not available, you say it over the bread, not beer. Now, those who heard this response understood from it that it is kiddush that one may not recite over it, but one may recite Havdala. Since they changed the question from Havdala to kiddush, it must be that kiddush we can't say over beer, but Havdala we can say over beer. Rahista said to them that Rav said as follows: just as one may not recite kiddush over beer made from dates, so one may not recite Havdala over it. It was also stated that Rav Tachalifa bar Avimi said, that Shmuel said, just as one may not recite kiddush over date beer, so one may not recite Havdala over it. But of course there's going to be an exception. So before I turn the page, let's just read the law. Wine of the province, Chamar Medina. Because remember, when a Maimar came back the next year, they offered him beer again because wine was so hard to come by. And he did make Havdala over beer. So he did make Havdala over beer. These rulings are saying, just as we don't say kiddush over beer, you can't say Havdala over beer. But when a Maimar came to Rav Chista's house the second year, the first year he wouldn't do it. He waited till they found some wine, and then he made Havdala over the wine. But the second year, they offered him beer again for Havdala, and he did say Havdala over beer. Why? The halacha is, the sages discuss the appropriate course of action when the requisite wine is unavailable. Is one permitted to use a different beverage known as Chamar Medina, the wine of the province, which replaces wine as the main beverage in that place? Now, with regard to Havdala, the halakha is that one may recite Havdala using wine of the province. However, one may not recite Havdala over bread, right? So kiddush on Friday night, if wine is not available, we say it over bread. Havdala on Saturday night, if wine is not available, we use whatever is the best beverage available in that place, what's considered to be a fine beverage in that locality, and we do not say Havdala over bread. Some commentaries say that one may also recite kiddush over the wine of the province, and other authorities rule that if there's no wine available, kiddush should be recited over bread. The Rosh maintains that at night one should recite kiddush over bread, and during the day over the wine of the province, and this is the prevailing custom. So on Friday night, if there's no wine, you say kiddush over the challah, over the bread. Saturday during the day, if no wine is available, you use whatever is considered the finest beverage of that locality. And I've often seen people make the Saturday morning kiddush over spirits. I've seen it done over vodka, over scotch, over other kinds of, something that's considered a fine beverage. With regard to the grace after meals, if wine is unavailable, it is permitted to use the wine of the province. So for Birkat Hamazon, if you don't have wine and you have a minyan and you want to say it over a beverage and you don't have wine, you can make Chamar Medina over the wine of the province, whatever's considered the fine beverage there. And even if wine is available but expensive, one may use the wine of the province instead of wine. That's for the grace after meals. If one does not have even the wine of the province, he may use any other beverage that is a popular drink in that locale, even if it is entirely dissimilar to wine. So there we go. That's the law of the wine of the province. The wine of the province, which can be not wine. It's just whatever is finest there. Okay. The Gemara relates that Levi sent Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi a beer of 13 soakings, i.e., 13 batches of dates had been soaked in water until it had thoroughly absorbed the taste of the dates. This was considered very high quality beer, right? So Levi sent to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the editor of the Mishnah, a beer that he said, now listen, I know we don't say kiddush over beer. We're not supposed to say Havdala over beer, but this beer, this is not your ordinary beer. This is high-end craft beer. So can we say kiddush over this? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi tasted it, and it was especially pleasant. He said, a beer like this is fit to recite kiddush over and to say upon it all the songs and praises in the world, as it is as good as wine. However, that night, it disrupted his digestion. It caused him pain. And he said, it pains on the one hand and it soothes on the other. It's really nice tasting, beautiful beer, but it caused me pain later. And with regard to the discomfort caused by beer, the Gemara cites related statements of Amoraim. Rav Yosef said, I will take a vow in public, which cannot be nullified, that I will not drink beer. Period. Rav Yosef was not a fan of beer, at least we're talking about date beer, due to its negative effects, despite the fact that beer was a popular beverage in Babylonia. Rava said, I would rather drink water used for soaking flax than drink beer. So not everybody was a fan of date beer, even though it was so popular in the Babylonian Jewish community. And Rava said, one who recites kiddush over beer, his regular drink should be beer. Now what he's saying is, okay, everybody loves beer, but everyone acknowledges that wine is finer, right? We love, winer is fine, I can't say that. But everyone acknowledges that wine is finer, right? So Rava is saying, okay, people like beer, maybe there's really good high-end beers, but for your kiddush, find wine. Go out there, exert yourself, and do it, say it over wine. For if you don't, you will end up making beer your typical drink, meaning beer was more associated with the common people making less money. Wine was associated with the wealthy people. So what Rav is saying is, if you have the means to make your kiddush over wine, but you make it over beer anyway, in the end you'll lose your prosperity and you'll have to make kiddush over beer. So exert yourself for Shabbos, right? And that's why you'll find in many Jewish communities, people really who are not so well-to-do will exert themselves to set a beautiful meal for Shabbos. And that's why, it really is, for people who are not used to it, it's like every Shabbos we have a dinner, which is the equivalent of like a Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, every Friday night we have a really beautiful dinner, and that's just one of the ways you fulfill your obligation to remember and delight in Shabbos. Where am I? It should be like beer. And the Gemara relates that Rav was found by Rav Huna reciting kiddush over beer. And he said to him, Abba, which was Rav's first name, has started to acquire coins with beer. So here what he said was, so what happened was that Rav Huna got into the beer business. He became a brewer, a master brewer. Now, once he became a maker of beer, he certainly made sure that the beer that he was saying kiddush over on Friday nights was the absolute finest beer that money could buy, or that he himself was able to manufacture as a beer expert, right? So now that he's a beer expert, he knows that he can land the very finest beer. And so, that was Rav. And so Rav Huna said about Rav, okay, so Rav is going to make kiddush over beer, but let's not forget that he is a beer master. And the beer he's using for kiddush is not the beer that most people would be using if they made kiddush over beer. The sages taught, one may recite kiddush only over wine, and one may recite blessings only over wine. The Gemara expresses surprise. Is that to say that one does not say the blessing by whose word all things come to be? Shakol nihiyeh b'divaro, right? That's a blessing that we say over beer or over water. When we drink water, when we drink beer, we say, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. That's the blessing over water and beer. And Abaye said, this is what the Barais is saying. One only says, bring a cup of blessing to recite the blessing of the grace after meals over wine. And the rabbis taught in a Baraisa, one may not recite kiddush over beer. In the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, they said that one may recite kiddush over beer. So as we've seen, the law is we don't say kiddush over beer. If we have no wine, we say it over bread. Some people will say kiddush over beer. That is the minority and is generally to be avoided. But Havdala, if we don't have wine, we can say it over beer or whatever is the finest beverage available. With regard to the halacha, the law that one who recites kiddush must drink from the cup. Now, you're saying kiddush, you've made a blessing over a cup of wine, right? The blessing that you're saying is kiddush. So what you're doing is sanctifying the day. But you open by saying a blessing over the wine. Then you make the blessing, you bless God for sanctifying this day that we're now enjoying, Shabbos. Then you finish the blessing, the kiddush that actually sanctifies the day, and then you drink the wine that you blessed at the beginning of this blessing. So since you made a blessing over wine, you now have to drink some of it. So one fulfills the mitzvah of kiddush by tasting any amount of the wine. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Yehuda, says, no, one must drink at least a cheekful of the wine. Rav Huna said that Rav said, and Rav Giddel from the city of Nerish likewise teaches, one who recites kiddush and tastes a cheekful has fulfilled his obligation. And if he does not taste a cheekful of wine from the kiddush cup, then he has not fulfilled his obligation. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, I teach this baraisa in a precise manner, and I do not mention Giddel bar Menashe nor Giddel bar Minyume, but rather the plain name Giddel, without any identifying moniker. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference in Rav Giddel's name? And the Gemara answers, to raise a contradiction between one of his rulings and another of his rulings. Right? So there were two Rav Giddels, and they had different views on some other matter. And so if we quoted the wrong one here, there would be a contradiction between this ruling and another ruling. So when they're reciting a teaching in the name of a sage, and it was one of the lesser known sages, and they're not sure which Rav Giddel it is, they don't pick one. they just repeat the teaching the way they heard it quite precisely. The Gemara returns to the Mishnah. So now here we are on page 107 at the bottom of the A side, and we're finally returning to our Mishnah on page 99a, the Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 10. So we return to the Mishnah, which stated that it is prohibited to eat adjacent to Mincha time, the afternoon prayer, on the afternoon before Passover begins that night, on Erev Pesach. A dilemma was raised before the sages in the study hall. Did we learn in the Mishnah that it is prohibited to eat adjacent to the time of the greater Mincha, Mincha Gedola, meaning the greater time, the better time to say the afternoon service, which is when? As soon as it becomes possible to say the afternoon service, which is shortly after noon, a half an hour after midday. Or perhaps we learned in the Mishnah that it is prohibited to eat adjacent to the time of the lesser Mincha, which is about 2.5 hours before sunset. So we're going to stop eating on the afternoon before Passover begins that night. From when do we stop eating? From about half an hour after noon, or from about 2.5 hours before sunset? When do we stop eating? That's the question that's been asked. And the Gemara elaborates. Did we learn in the Mishnah that it is prohibited to eat adjacent to the time of the greater Mincha? And this is because of the Paschal lamb, lest one come to be drawn after the meal and spend a long time eating, as was typical for large meals. Remember, when are we doing this? Bringing the Paschal lamb, when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, in ancient Israel, and everybody would make the pilgrimage festival up to Jerusalem. And now it's a totally atypical situation compared to the rest of the year when we're living at home. Now we've all gone on a trip. We're all staying in some kind of hotel or bed and breakfast or an inn, or we're camping, or we have a tent, and we're all up there, camping in Jerusalem. And we're seeing our friends that we only see a couple of times a year. And so, of course, we're going to have a festive lunch on Friday afternoon, right? So when should we make sure that we stop eating that lunch, right? Because if we start eating that lunch, let's say at noon, knowing that we have to start fasting at 12:30, okay, well, we wouldn't do that. We would start the lunch earlier. And is the reason that they're saying you have to stop eating at 12:30 because if you started to have a lunch at 12 and then you got involved in a really long festive meal with all your relatives that you don't see all the time, you might still be eating at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And then what would you have done? You might have neglected your obligation to shecht the Korban Pesach, to slaughter the Passover lamb or goat that you brought to Jerusalem, registered to your group of people that needs to be slaughtered that afternoon. So you have what to eat that night, the Passover lamb that you're all going to eat at your Seder, only when the temple is standing. So maybe they decreed that you need to stop eating that afternoon from like a half hour after noon. As was typical for large meals, and he would end up refraining from performing the Paschal lamb. Or perhaps we learned this halacha in the Mishnah as pertaining to the time of the lesser mincha, later in the afternoon, about 2.5 hours before sunset, and we're going to stop eating from then, just the last 2.5 hours of daylight. And why? Because at that point, we just want to stop eating and make sure that we come into Passover night with a good appetite to eat the matzah. Right, we're going to taste the Korban Pesach, but very often there were a lot of people registered to a small lamb because they were expensive and difficult, and we have a big group of people. We only need to get just a little taste of the Passover lamb, but everybody has to eat a decent quantity of matzah, and we should eat that matzah, and that's still the obligation that we eat matzah on the first night of Passover, and we should eat that matzah with gusto, with hunger. And perhaps that's why we stop eating in the afternoon. So do we stop eating from a half hour afternoon, or do we stop eating from the last 2.5 hours of daylight? Ravina said, come and hear a solution from a Baraisa. Even King Agrippa, who regularly eats every day at 9 hours, i.e. 3 hours before sunset, on that day of Passover, he may not eat until dark. And Ravina infers from this Baraisa, granted, if you say that we learned in the Mishnah that it is prohibited to eat adjacent to the lesser mincha, this is why his actions are accounted to the greatness of Agrippa, as he refrained from eating despite the fact that the prohibition had not yet gone into effect. Meaning it was the king's practice to get up late every day, very late. He was a night owl. So every day he would get up really late, like after midday, and he would have his first meal of the day at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So if they're going to say that you have to stop eating from about 4:30, in fact, he would have his meal at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and they're saying that the fast begins at about 4:30 in the afternoon, about 3:30 in the afternoon. Right, so he would normally eat at about 3, and they would say that the fast starts at about 3:30 in the afternoon. So if he's going to be bound by the same law as everybody else, he can't start his meal at the typical time of 3 o'clock because it's a king's breakfast, as it were. He spends an hour over breakfast eating like a king. So a meal like that, you wouldn't start half an hour before the fast goes into effect. So what was the greatness of King Agrippa? He was a righteous king. So even though he's a king and he's accustomed to eating at 3 o'clock every day, on Erev Pesach, on the afternoon before Passover, he would make sure to have his breakfast earlier so that he could start his fast at the same time as everyone else. But if they were saying that you have to start fasting from 12:30 on, then he would be in the same boat as everyone else. It wouldn't be like anything special for him to start his meal because it's already in the fast period. Rabbi Yosei said, it is prohibited to eat let me make sure. Yeah. Ultimately, what is the greatness of Agrippa? The time of the prohibition had arrived. Although the 9th hour begins shortly before the prohibition goes into effect, Agrippa's meal would presumably extend into the time when it is prohibited to eat, and therefore was indeed prohibited for him to start his meal at his regular time. The Gemara answers, since Agrippa was accustomed to eating in the afternoon, it might have been thought that he should be permitted to eat at this hour even on Passover Eve, because he's the king. And that's his habit every day. Lest you say that since Agrippa would not eat during the morning like most people, 9 hours for Agrippa was considered like 4 hours for us. 3 o'clock in the afternoon for him is like 10 o'clock in the morning for us. The Baraita therefore teaches us that we do not distinguish between Agrippa and anyone else in this regard. Rabbi Yosef, and I'm almost done, so get your questions in. Rabbi Yosef said, it is prohibited to eat a proper meal from mincha time onward. However, so now we've established that the law is, it's not that we have to fast all afternoon from like at 12:30 on the afternoon before Pesach. We should stop eating with 2.5 hours to go until sunset, to approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, what does it mean to stop eating? Does that mean no food whatsoever? Not quite. Rabbi Yosef said it is prohibited to eat a proper meal from mincha time, from the afternoon prayer, from the later time of the afternoon prayer onward. However, one may dip and eat types of refreshments. In other words, fruit or meat that do not constitute a full meal and will not fill one's stomach. And the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yitzchak would dip and eat vegetables. And that opinion, that it is permitted to snack after mincha time on Passover Eve, the afternoon before Passover night, was also taught in a baraisa. During the afternoon of Passover Eve, the waiter may dip vegetables in the intestines of the animals that had been slaughtered in preparation for the festive meals and place them before the guests who had registered for the Paschal lamb. Why? This was done to whet their appetites, so they would eat the Paschal lamb and the matzah that evening with greater relish. So you can have snacks in the afternoon. Now, once nightfall comes, no, now you don't eat until you say the kiddush as part of the Passover Seder. But in the afternoon, yeah, you could have a little Tom Pesach, a little taste of Pesach, a little bit, just a little snack to whet the appetite that afternoon. And the whole point is that it should whet the appetite and not satisfy you, make you feel full, so that it becomes like a burden to eat the ritual foods of Passover. The Baraisa continues, and although there is no absolute proof for this matter, there is an allusion to this matter as it is stated from Jeremiah 4:3. Break up for yourselves a fallow ground and do not sow among thorns. If you're gonna plant crops, plant them in good, healthy soil, not in a cruddy field that's already overgrown by weeds. In other words, if you prepare properly, you will reap the reward. And if you just do things, half-assed at the last minute, you will reap the natural consequence of that. The Gemara relates that Rava would drink wine the entire day of Passover Eve so as to whet his appetite to enable him to eat more matzah at night. Rava said, from where do I say it? That wine whets the appetite? As we learned in a Mishnah, during the Passover Seder, and now we're actually working our way back to the 4 cups of wine of the Passover Seder. During the Passover Seder, between these cups that one is obligated to drink, for example, between the first 2 of the 4 cups of wine, if one wants to drink, he may drink. In other words, we have 4 cups of wine at the Passover Seder, 2 before dinner and 2 after dinner. Between the 2 that precede dinner, we may drink additional wine, and it doesn't consider that that's going to ruin our appetite for the festive meal. However, between the 3rd and 4th cups, which are consumed after the meal, one may not drink. And if you say that wine satisfies a person, why may one drink extra cups between the 2 cups that precede dinner? He will later eat matzah when he is already satiated, which will consume excessive eating. Rather, learn from this that wine does not ruin the appetite, but rather it stimulates the appetite. Now, if you are a person that if you drink a bunch of wine, you're going to lose your appetite. So no, don't drink wine in the afternoon before Passover, and don't drink a lot of wine between the first 2 cups that precede the meal. But if you're the sort of person where drinking a bunch of wine is only going to make you hungrier, then you may drink wine on the afternoon of Passover and between the 2 obligated cups that precede the meal. All right, that's what I've got for us this evening. Let me check your comments and questions. Okay. Susan Kane. We make Havdala on bourbon and then set it on fire with the Havdala candle in the ceramic Havdala plate. Highly recommended. I know need pass that question along. For sure, we were going to do that question because we do the same thing. Not always. Usually we do Havdala over wine, but from time to time we do it over bourbon or scotch or some, refined spirit, liquor, and it's a lot of fun. You can definitely make the blessing. Now you have to make sure that first blessing of Havdala is not Berei Pri Hagafen, the blessing over wine, but rather Shakol Nihye B'Divaro, by whose word everything comes into being. The first blessing is over the beverage you're holding in your hand, which is scotch or bourbon or whatever, and especially if it's a high proof distilled liquor, it's going to work even better. We take a taste of it, the one who recites Havdala, then we put it onto a ceramic plate, and then we put the candle out in the liquor, which is going to cause it to go out on the wick, but there'll be a flame over the booze. And it's fun. And then we of course we have the lights off and we all watch it, and it's nice. It's just a beautiful little sort of fireworks show on the counter, watching the alcohol burn in its blue light. And it's nice because it sort of keeps everyone there for a little longer and everyone focused on the flame in the dark. And it kind of does remind us of creation and that first day after Shabbos when Adam and Eve came out of the Garden of Eden, but were granted fire, kind of going out into the darkness with this magical gift of fire from the Lord. Beautiful, beautiful tradition. Sharon says, for students, I have put Everclear grain alcohol in the plate, but I say the blessing on wine. But the amazing light from the candle and the alcohol is beautiful. You can't drink Everclear. That's like almost pure alcohol. If you drink that, it can make you go blind. But I can imagine it'll burn great and for a long time. Sharon says, but I say the Saturday morning kiddush on bourbon. As we saw, wine on Friday nights is a must. If you don't have the wine, you make kiddush over the challah, over the bread. Saturday morning, you can use whatever you consider to be a fine beverage, and sure, you can make it over bourbon. Man, I was once at a lunch where a fellow came. He was a rabbi. I mean, he was just, and certainly not somebody you'd call a drinker. Like during the week, the guy never would drink. But he could handle his booze on Shabbos, and he made kiddush over, like a glass this size filled with vodka, and then he drank it all. And I said, I can't believe what I just saw. If I drank that much vodka, I'd be in the hospital, without a doubt. This guy was fine. I couldn't believe it. Not recommended. Not recommended. Sharon, I have been to many a very traditional wedding where Birkat Hamazon was said over beer. Again, we can say the grace after meals over beer. Michael, discussion maybe for another day, but I get frustrated when the Gemara says that this is a proof. Now I'm looking for a logical mathematical proof. But then I recognize that proof of this nature did not come into being until maybe the times of the Enlightenment. So proof in medieval times would not be so stringent. More like, hey, 2 highly respected scholars do this at home, therefore they would not do the wrong thing, thus your proof. Am I off track? I mean, yeah, look, it is going to be a proof to them if a very respected, very prominent sage acted a certain way, right? It's not just that they were hoping that they were correct in their analysis when they looked into scripture and found an allusion to a law that could probably be inferred indirectly, though it's not stated directly in the Torah. That might leave you a little bit unsure. But exactly, when you see a great sage and when you see 2 great sages behaving that way, boom, we copy them and we can be confident that this is the right way to behave, and they would call that a proof. And of course, that's not the same as, how you prove the Pythagorean theorem. For those that would get excited by figuring out how to prove the Pythagorean theorem, I just remember that we were once we were in college once, and we had learned that in high school, and we're like, how do you prove the Pythagorean theorem? Could we figure that out? And if you can't remember what the proof is, just to figure it out on your own was incredibly satisfying. And it involves a square within a square, a little bit rotated. You can figure that out. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us this evening. It's great to be learning with you. What did we learn tonight? You do not make kiddush over beer on Friday night. You can make kiddush over beer Saturday morning. It is always preferable to make it over wine. If you don't have wine Friday night, you make it over bread. Saturday morning, if you don't have wine, you can make it over a fine beverage. Likewise for Havdala. And we give honor to the lastborn in a family. Why? Because the lastborn was born when the parents were at their eldest, and they were able to transmit the most wisdom to the youngest child because they were simply older when they had that child. So let's remember to give honor to the youngest in a family, or even in between, honor to our younger siblings, just as they should give honor to their older siblings. Have a great